This morning we're going to be talking about the sin that crucified Jesus. If we go to Acts chapter 2, Acts chapter 2, this is in the middle of Peter's sermon. And I'm wanting to test the mic out, so I will be asking people to read. Acts chapter 2, if we can get Gord to read verse 23.
Him being delivered by the determined purpose and the foreknowledge of God, you have taken by lawless hands, have crucified and put to death.
So we see here that there was, what was the reason Jesus was crucified? What was the reason? General reason. Sins. We're going to get into Gord's answer in a few moments, because Gord had envy and other things in there. Generally, yes, we recognize it was sin that crucified Jesus. And was Jesus deserving of death? Was it his sin that crucified him? No. Jesus was a sinless man. Jesus was a man that was no guile found in his mouth, no reason for him to be crucified. And so, if Jesus did not deserve death, and sin caused the crucifixion of Jesus, a general question is, okay, what sin crucified Jesus? And the answer might be, well, many sins. I think I heard, Gord, what did you say earlier?
Envy from the Jewish rulers.
Okay, so envy. And I think you said something too, Kala.
I said for the sins of men.
Okay. So you were a little bit more general. I thought I heard something else as well. But we recognize that, okay, sin, different types of sin, crucify Jesus. And so that's the answer a lot of people give. Well, it must be done. So let's take a look at some of the sins that made it possible for Jesus to be crucified. So going along with Gord's, we have envy, and I believe you can tie that in with prejudice. Like as far as, what does prejudice mean?
Prejudging.
So prejudging, based on what? Usual.
Him being coming up from the son of a carpenter.
Yeah. So that would be based. We've been talking about it very recently, Jeff.
It's usually personal bias.
Yeah, based on appearance and personal bias. When Gord is exactly right. It's prejudging. That's what prejudice means. Prejudging, but prejudging not based on actual fact. Prejudging based on appearance and personal bias. We all have personal bias. We all come from maybe different backgrounds, different cultures, and baked into our cultures are bias. And it doesn't mean that all bias is wrong, because there are some bias that is okay to have. But we have to recognize our bias so that we don't allow that bias to get in the way of us looking at other people and making conclusions about them without knowing them, without ever talking about them or to them. And so we got to be careful with that. You had something, Gordon?
Yeah, we have an expression, don't judge a book by the cover.
Yeah. Don't judge a book by its cover is a very good way of looking at things. I can assume a lot of things about people. And if I assume a lot of things about people without actually knowing them, my assumptions could be wrong. And so, with Jesus, people not only looked down on him from his background, but because of that, they didn't think he was the Messiah. Let's go to Matthew 13. Kala, you want to get Matthew 13, verses 54 to 57. Matthew 13, verses 54 through 57.
He came to his hometown and began teaching them in their synagogue, so that they were astonished, and said, "Where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers? Is it not this the carpenter's son? Is it not his mother called Mary, and his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? And his sisters, are they not all with us? Where then did this man get all these things?"
Verse 57 as well.
And they took offense at him, but Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own hometown and in his own household."
Okay, so let's think about some things here. Jesus performed miracles. A lot of people think today, well, if we only had miracles, if men and women could perform miracles, then there would be a whole bunch of people who believed. Is that necessarily the case? No. Why not?
Because they will find another reason to question the authority of Jesus.
Yeah. There's always, if I don't want to believe, I'm not going to believe. A lot of times on YouTube, I'll get comments, and I have to sit back and think, okay, is this person actually open to hearing or not? And yes, I have to have a little bit of experience looking at their comment as to how to interpret it. A lot of times I will comment back, but there are times I'll comment back, and then I'll get another comment from them again, and I'm like, oh, they don't really want to talk. They're going to it doesn't matter what I say, they're not ready to hear the gospel. Because all it is, if it's not one thing, it's another thing, and it's another thing, and it's another thing. Why was Jesus rejected here in Nazareth, but accepted in some other places?
Well, because they know him, that he's a carpenter's son, his mother Mary, his brothers and sisters, and they're just common people. So
Yeah.
why would I accept him?
Yeah. You ever experienced that where you have gained some prominence? Doesn't matter what it's in. You've gained some prominence. The people who know you best, who knew you growing up, or knew you before you gained that prominence, say, I remember you as a kid. I can't possibly think that that you've obtained, that you're maybe as smart as you say you are, or that you're as talented as you say you are. We have a lot of problems sometimes with people we know getting past the idea that I know you. Oh, carpenter's son. Jesus wasn't very rich. Didn't go and get educated. Now, yes, he could perform miracles, but really, are they really miracles? Their mind was clouded. And the Pharisees got to be the same way. The Pharisees didn't know him growing up, but they saw the miracles. We know they knew because the scriptures say they knew. They couldn't deny the miracles, but their prejudice against Jesus clouded their judgment. But also, we have here their hatred of Jesus. And that we have to recognize that sometimes prejudice will lead to hatred. It does a lot of the time, Lord.
Well, the last verse in that chapter says, "Now he did not do many mighty works because of their unbelief."
Yeah. Going back to Nazareth, because that shows us a thing where we try to spread the gospel, but if people won't listen, we go to other people. It's not that we completely abandon them forever. Maybe there will come a time when they would believe. But we shouldn't waste our time trying to go after someone who just will not show any inclination to believe at all. But coming ahead to hatred of Jesus, we see in Matthew chapter 15, we're going to get We'll start with 1 to 3. We'll get Jeff to get 1 to 3 of Matthew 15.
Then the scribes and Pharisees who were from Jerusalem came to Jesus, saying, Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread. He answered and said to them, Why do you also transgress the commandment of God because of your tradition?
So put yourself in the Jewish leaders' shoes. What was their problem with Jesus here?
The disciples weren't washing their hands.
Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that they weren't being properly hygienic?
No, he's not doing things their way or what they think is right.
Yeah, this was a religious thing. They're not doing things our way. We're the religious leaders. We know the law of Moses, even though they didn't. You have to do things our way. Now, what was Jesus' response?
Why you transgress God's commandments?
All right, you're the Jewish leaders. You want control. You think that you deserve to be followed. Now, if someone told you, why do you transgress the commandments of God, what do you think the most likely response is going to be? Anger. Rejection. As far as people, you tell a religious leader that they are wrong, and a lot of the times people get defensive.
Because they don't have an answer.
Well, they sometimes they don't have an answer, but sometimes they think they have the answer, and their answer is wrong. Calla.
But also they will think, who are you to tell me that?
Yeah.
Who are you?
Same thing, right? The prejudice of Jesus. You're not a rabbi. You're not an educated person. If we see that in Acts when it comes to the apostles, they learned that they were fishermen. That they were not learned people. And because of that, they rejected Jesus. Or rejected the apostles. So, again, Cal is right. Who are you to tell me? We've got to be careful with that attitude when it comes to those who preach the gospel. Someone comes up and says, you know, preacher, I think you were wrong on that. Well, the preacher's got to take a little dose of humility too. Perhaps I am. Let's sit down and chat. I'm not the be-all and end-all. I can be wrong. And if I am wrong, I need to change. That's not the attitude here. Let's continue on. We're going to read 2 verses each. We'll do 7 through 20 of Matthew chapter 15. We'll start with Sandra, head back to Lester and then James, and then Naomi and around. Matthew 15, 7 through 20.
Hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying, These people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me.
Verse 11, James, if you got it, of Matthew 15. If not, I can go back to Naomi and come back up. Okay. 11, please, and 12.
Not that which goeth into the mouth defileth a man, but that which cometh out of the mouth. This is defileth a man. Then came his disciples and said unto him, Knowest thou that the Pharisees were offended after they heard this saying?
He answered, Every plant my heavenly Father does not touch will be rooted up. That being love, they are blind eyes. If the blind keep his line, so it falls to his head.
We'll come up to Wilbur.
2 verses?
2 verses, yes, please.
And Peter answered and said to him, Explain this parable to us. So Jesus said, Are you also still without understanding? Do you not yet understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated?
And these things which pass it out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile the man. For out of the heart passes evil thoughts, murderers, adulterers, fornications, thefts, false witnesses,
blasphemous.
These are the things which defile a man, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man.
Okay, so what was the commandment Jesus was saying the Pharisees were breaking? What was that commandment? Back in verse 4.
Honor your father and your mother.
Yeah. So the Pharisees had set up a system where you could, of course, giving to the temple was an obligation of the Jews. But what someone could do is they could take their money and almost treat it like a trust fund, where they'll say, all right, I'm going to set up this amount of money, whatever it is, and I'm going to devote that to the temple. And whatever I devote to the temple, I can't use to help my father and mother.
The law of Portland.
Yeah, that's the law of Portland. And so this idea here was, I'm going to get around honoring my father and mother by doing something else. Something that sounds good. But the thing was, they could use that money for other purposes too, as long as they have said that was what they were going to use it for. And of course, the Pharisees were involved in the temple, got rich off that money too, and so not only did they devote some money to the temple, they got some of it back in the form of what being supported by the temple is too. And so they got around honoring father and mother by doing something else that looked good. Whereas God was saying, you got to honor father and mother. If you do not honor father and mother, you do not honor me. You're worse than an infidel, 1 Timothy 5 would say, if you do not take care of your parents when they are older. And that's a warning for us too, that we need to care for our parents if they cannot care for themselves. We get into a situation where we hold our money so tight that we think don't have responsibility to help others. Well, I'm giving that money to the church. The church needs those funds. Well, the church, giving to the church is good, but if we're shirking our other obligations too, to our family, whether it's our personal family or our extended family, our parents, then are we really obeying God? And so Jesus is saying here, you're trying to get around the actual command of God to do something that's not commanded of God. They were told to tithe, yes, but they were also told to honor father and mother. You got to do both. You can't pick one or the other. Because again, imagine hearers there. You're Jewish leaders, and you hear that. Peter said they're offended. They were offended by you. And Jesus said, when you think about it, washing your hands is doing nothing to cleanse anything. Like as far as what goes into the body, that's not what defiles a man. What comes out of the body, that defiles a man. And what was coming out of the Pharisees' mouths and hearts was evil. Washing their hands didn't do anything to take care of that. And so this caused hatred by the Pharisees. They hated Jesus. And so that was involved in crucifying Jesus. Coming to Judas, what did he do? Pardon me? He betrayed Jesus. Let's come up to Casey. Matthew chapter 26, verses 13 to 16.
Surely I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be told as a memorial to us. Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him to you?" And they counted out to him 30 pieces of silver. So from that time he saw opportunity to betray him.
what is betrayal? Just so we all understand. What's betrayal? Pardon me?
Deceive.
All right, to deceive someone and then do what? Sorry, I'm having...
Break their trust.
Yep, break their trust. In this case, Judas was going to hand Jesus over to the Pharisees and the chief priests. Now, I really believe if you see Judas's reaction, Judas thought Jesus would escape. And then he would become richer. That's why when he saw that he was going to be condemned, he tried to give the money back. He didn't like the other disciples. Jesus had been telling them about his death, but Judas wasn't understanding. He'd seen Jesus escape numerous times. But that didn't mean that he didn't betray Jesus. He did. If Judas wouldn't have betrayed Jesus, it would have been a lot tougher for the Pharisees to capture him. And of course, that was all in God's plan. He knew that was going to happen. This is how it was orchestrated. He didn't cause Judas to do it, but he knew Judas would because of Judas's character. And that's the difference between the providence of God. It's not that God causes people to do bad things, but God knows people better than we know ourselves. Jesus selected Judas on purpose because he knew that was the type of man who would be greedy for money and would betray him when he got the chance. Because Jesus had been teaching all week in the temple. The Pharisees wanted to capture him, but were afraid of the people. Because the people thought he was a mighty teacher. The Pharisees were cowards. And they didn't want to upset the people because they knew that would lead to a riot and that they would be the ones being blamed. And so when Judas came to them, wow, I'm sure they weren't expecting that. Judas was a friend. To betray someone, you have to be close to them. I cannot betray someone I am not close to. I can certainly do evil to them, but betrayal is by someone you trust and someone who breaks that trust. Jesus told the disciples that someone would betray him, because Jesus knew what was going to happen. So betrayal was one of those sins that crucified Jesus. When it comes to Jesus' trial, think about the trial before the high priest. What happened at that trial? Let's go to Matthew 26 and read verses 59 to 62. We'll get Sandy to get 59 and 60, and Annette 61 and 62 of Matthew 26. Verse 61 and 62, Annette.
And said, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days. And the high priest arose and said to him, do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you?
Okay, so think about it here. What did the Jews try to do? False witnesses, what sin would we call that? Lying. And they had trouble finding lying witnesses. I find that quite funny, that they had trouble because no one could agree on the lie. No one could agree on the lie, and that's what often happens with lying. If you get a group together, sometimes you can find a lie and you can build the story on the lie. They were unable to do that. However, there were people who came along and said, well, he said he was going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days. Is that what Jesus said? Yes, it was what Jesus said. Is that what Jesus meant by what he said? What did he mean?
When he made that statement, where was he?
He was in front of the temple.
Yeah, but he was also referring to himself as the temple.
That's the point. That statement was made not in the book of Matthew. That statement was made in the book of John, in John chapter 2. And the Jews misunderstood that. Some of the Jews misunderstood that. Not all of them. There are people who I'm sure understood that. It was a lie to come along and say Jesus threatened the temple. He didn't threaten the temple of God. He wasn't going to destroy it. Now, he prophesied against its destruction, but not by him. He wasn't going to build it in 3 days. Jesus had the power to do that. He had the power to build it in 1 second if he wanted to. He was speaking about the temple of his body and the type of death he would die and that he would rise again. But we had false witnesses here. Lies are going to convict Jesus because the chief priest is looking for any excuse whatsoever to send Jesus to Pilate. Because if they didn't come with a charge before Pilate, what was Pilate going to say?
Why don't you bring him here? You judge him.
Yeah. Pilate needed a charge. Now, in the end, yes, we'll get to what Pilate did in a minute. But you can't come before the Romans without a charge. Callum.
But okay, even his false witnesses just said, or this man said that he could destroy the temple and build it in 3 days. Well, wait and see. 3 days is not a lot of time.
Yeah.
Technically, they should take that opportunity too.
Yeah.
To see if it would happen. Just saying. I mean,
No, I understand, but they were lying in that's what he meant. And that's the point I'm making. But when it came to standing before the Romans, you had to have a charge. Think about what we're studying in our podcast this last week and this next week. Festus was looking for a charge to send Paul to Nero. Paul had already appealed to Nero. But if you're a governor and you're sending someone before the king, and the king's going to say, all right, what is this man charged with? Nothing. What? Nero is not a good man to begin with. You're wasting his time. He's not going to look kindly on a governor that sends someone, a Roman citizen at that, to him with no charge. The Philippians, in Acts chapter 16, when the rulers of the city knew that they had beaten Paul without charge, they were afraid and sent him out of the city, told him to go away because they were afraid that word would get out that they beat a Roman citizen without charge. Well, the Jews weren't in good with the Romans anyway. They didn't like paying their taxes. There were revolts every now and then. If they didn't send Jesus with a charge, they were going to get themselves in trouble. But they couldn't find a charge. They manufactured a bunch of charges, but they couldn't find one. But lying eventually did this. This is one of the charges they brought Jesus with, to Pilate with, that he's leading insurrections. And because that's what destroying the temple would be, is basically an insurrection. And the Roman fortress was sitting right beside the temple. And so when the Roman fortress is sitting right beside the temple, it would get destroyed too, most likely. And so that would be a threat to the Romans as well. So lying, we might say lying crucified Jesus. It was lying. Then we come to Peter. What did Peter do? He denied Jesus. Let's come up to Annie and then Steffi. Matthew chapter 26. Annie, you get 69, 70, and 71. And Steffi, 72 to 75. Matthew 26. Verse 6.
He was set outside of the Antioch,
and a servant for whom began saying, "You also want me Jesus of Galilee?" But he denied it before them all, saying, "I do not know what you say." And when they had gone out to the gateway, another fool saw him and said to him, "You are here." His disciple also was with Jesus about him. And but again he denied with an oath, "I do not know the man." And a little later, those who stood by came up and said to Peter, "Surely you also are one of them, for your speech betrays you." Then he began to curse and swear, saying, "I do not know the man." Immediately a rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the words of Jesus, who said to him, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." So he went out and wept bitterly.
All right. Now we might think, okay, Peter, he didn't yell at crucify. Wasn't in there lying about Jesus. Didn't betray Jesus. But we might think, okay, this did have something to do with it, because he didn't go in and defend Jesus either. Jesus had no one sitting there. None of his disciples came along and said, no, that's a lie. All of this is lies. This is all wrong. You need to release him. No one stood there. Peter denied. I'll come along and say, well, that certainly had something to do with Jesus' death. And then, of course, we get to Pontius Pilate. Let's go to Matthew 27. Matthew 27. I would like us to get... I'd like us to get verses 20 through 26. We'll start with Phoebe, 20 through 23. It's Carmeline, right? 24 through 26.
The chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. The governor again said to them, "Which of the 2 things you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ?" They all said, "Let him be crucified." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted at all the more, "Let him be crucified."
When Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, but rather that a tumult was rising, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, "I am innocent of the blood of this just person. Receiving it." And all the people answered and said, "His blood be on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, and when he had scourged Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified.
All right, think of Pontius Pilate. What was his sin?
He had the power to release Jesus.
And?
He washed his hands.
And he washed his hands of it. What would we call that? He let a guilty man go and convicted an innocent man whom he declared innocent. What would we call that? It's not justice. It's injustice. We don't like throwing innocent people in jail, especially ones who've been declared innocent. If a court of law says, if a jury comes back and says, Your Honor, we find the defendant not guilty. Okay, you're sentenced to 20 years in jail. Or you're sentenced to death. We'd say, no, that's not the way it should be. He was found innocent. And the judge would say, not only am I going to convict this innocent person and going to sentence him to death, I'm going to allow this murderer over here. He's going to go free. He was found guilty. And you let him go free. That's injustice. Pilate was cowardly. And so we come along and say, well, all of these sins, they all crucify Jesus. If I was to suggest to you none of these sins crucified Jesus? Let's go to John chapter 10. John chapter 10. We'll come to Menchi, verses 17 and 18.
Therefore, that the Father loved me,
because I lay down my life, that I may take it again. No one taketh it away from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This commandment receive I from my Father.
So as bad as these sins were, what did Jesus say about his death? He did it willingly. He laid down his life. He did not need the hatred of the Jews or their prejudice. He did not need Judas's betrayal. He did not need the lying witnesses or the denial of Peter or the injustice of Pilate. All of that is, yes, sequenced into the events that humans did to bring about his crucifixion. But Jesus was going to die, no matter the circumstance. It was not any one sin that crucified Jesus. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that these weren't sins and they weren't involved. But it was not any one sin that crucified Jesus. It was all sin. It was our sin. It's your sin. It's Adam's sin. Abraham's sin. David's sin. The entire world's sin. That's what led to the crucifixion of Jesus. Let's get some verses that go along with this. We'll get Sean. You want to get Ephesians chapter 5, verse 2? No? Oh, okay, that's fine.
Sorry.
Well, we can come up. We'll come around. We'll just come around to Gord for a second. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 2. Kala, Galatians chapter 1, verse 4. And Jeff, Romans 5, 6 to 10. Go ahead.
And walk in love as Christ also has loved us and gave himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma.
Okay, Jesus gave himself as an offering to God, a sacrifice to God, because he loved us. Galatians chapter 1, verse 4.
Who gave himself for our sins so that he might rescue us from the present evil age, according to the will of our God and Father.
Again, he gave himself for our sins. That's what I want us to see. He gave himself. He was not forced to the cross against his will. He gave himself. Romans chapter 5, verses 6 to 10. Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff.
For when we were still without strength, in due time, Christ died for the ungodly. For scarcely for a righteous man one died, yet perhaps for a good man someone would even dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love toward us, in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Much more then, having now been justified by his blood, we shall be saved from wrath through him. For if when we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son, much more, having been reconciled, we shall be saved by his life.
So when it comes to the death of Jesus, let's not think, well, it was those people that put him on the cross. It was me. It was you. It was everyone who's lived. Yes, these events led to the cross, but they weren't the cause of the cross. Jesus loved us. He came to this earth to die for us so that we can be reconciled to God. Question is, will we be saved by Jesus? And that's the question we have to ask ourselves. It was our sin that crucified Jesus. All of else was incidental. I'm not ashamed to own my Lord, no.